was the man who campaigned tirelessly for 50 years for a return to free market economics in the United Kingdom. For so long, seen as a completely lost cause. He lived to see the return of a Conservative government dedicated to rolling back the frontiers of the state. He was the General Director of the Institute for Economic Affairs in London, Ralph Harris, Lord Harris of High Cross. Ralph Harris was born on the 10th of December 1924. He was the son of a tramways inspector and grew up on a council estate in North London, in the working class suburb of Tottenham. From an early age, he showed great academic potential, winning first a place at the Tottenham Grammar School, and then going on to read economics at Queen's College, Cambridge. He was to graduate with a first-class honours degree. Speak to anyone that met Ralph Harris, and the one thing they would tell you about him was that he had an enormous sense of enthusiasm. Harris always believed that his cause was righteous and that sheer hard work and dedication would ensure the truth would win out in the end. He was an optimist. Following graduation, he found employment working as a lecturer in political economy at St Andrews University in Scotland. Politically, Harris was a Conservative from the start. He briefly worked in London for the Conservative Political Centre before going on to stand for Parliament twice. Harris first stood as a Liberal Unionist candidate in Adam Smith's birthplace constituency of Kirkcaldy in 1951. This is somewhat odd, as the Liberal Unionists formally merged with the Conservative Party way back in 1914, but then Ralph was never one for observing convention. He was unsuccessful in that campaign, as he also was on his second attempt, this time running as a more conventionally labelled Conservative candidate in Edinburgh Central in the 1955 general election. But then in 1956, he would have a meeting that would change not only the course of his life, but also the course of British politics. Harris met with Anthony Fisher, a young businessman who was in the process of making his fortune with his own chicken production business. It was called Buxted Chickens. At the end of the Second World War, Fisher, then a young serviceman, had read a copy of F.A. Hayek's The Road to Serfdom and was determined to impose the rising tide of socialism. Fisher wrote to Hayek and then went to see him in his rooms at the London School of Economics. He asked the professor what he should do to personally help the cause. Should he stand for Parliament? Hayek advised him that if he wanted to change the opinion in society, he should first help change the political weather by making the intellectual case for the market economy. Fisher didn't have the money to do that then, but in 1957 he was able to open the Institute for Economic Affairs in the heart of Westminster, and Ralph was at its head. The campaign had begun. Britain in the 1950s had settled into an era now known as the Consensus. Following the nationalisation programme of the 1945 Labour government, coal, railways, health provision and the Bank of England had all become the exclusively state-owned monopolies. The Conservatives, when returned to power in 1951, showed no appetite to reverse that tide and preferred to style themselves as, frankly, more competent managers of the state. Only the iron and steel industry was partially returned to the private sector by the Conservatives. Making the case for the market economy in those times was not easy. Harris became not only the apostle, but also the colleague and the friend of F.A. Hayek in the struggle to change opinion in the UK. The first IEA paper, Pensions in a Free Society, was published in 1957, and 2 years later, the series of what would become Hobart papers was established. As the 1960s began, some Conservative politicians started to take note of Ralph's work, notably Enoch Powell. In 1967, he became secretary of Hayek's Mont Pelerin Society, and in 1976 he organised a major conference at St Andrews University, marking the 200 years since the publication of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. However, it was after the collapse of the Heath government in 1974 that Conservatives really started paying attention. One of the first through the door of the IEA's Lord North Street headquarters in this period was Sir Keith Joseph. Harris used to describe how they had set out a table with many of the publications and that Joseph went around picking out the ones that he wanted to read, rather like selecting groceries at a farmer's market. The ideas that Joseph took away with him from the IEA were of course also discussed with his friend and colleague, Margaret Thatcher. In 1975, Margaret Thatcher became leader of the Conservative Party and started paying very close attention to the IEA suggestions. Little wonder then that Ralph was offered a peerage as soon as she became Prime Minister in 1979. Characteristically, when joining the House of Lords, Lord Harris of High Cross, as Ralph has now become, decided to sit as an independent crossbencher rather than to toe the Conservative Party whip. In this role as a peer over the years, Harris campaigned and championed the rights of tobacco smokers and sponsored a repeal group to draw up lists of worthless government legislation which had led to unnecessary regulation that needed to be scrapped. As a person, he travelled the country, he spoke to students and he evangelised for the cause of the free market. He was quite a character, with his pipe and his colourful waistcoats and the middle parting of his hair. He used to joke that he resembled a character from a P.G. Wodehouse novel, and in many respects he did. In 1988, Lord Harris took up a new cause when he helped to found the Bruges Group to oppose the drift towards greater political union in Europe. He was ahead of the intellectual tide once again. He was to champion this cause until the end of his life. After decades of intellectual campaigning, Ralph Harris died on the 19th of October 2006 at the age of 81. Ralph Harris was the friend of the powerful and the great, who enjoyed nothing more than providing an intellectual nursery for Conservative students. A confidant of both Margaret Thatcher and Friedrich Hayek, he inspired my generation and helped us to understand the principles upon which the economy is based. He taught us the errors of socialism, and he showed us the way ahead.